Datorbyxa. Små bokstäver. Gemener.
Okej då är vi live. Vill jag passa på att välkomna er hit idag. I'll speak in English today, both because it's streaming and because we have visitors that prefer perhaps English. I hope that's not a problem. We're in Goto 10. You know this from before, Internet Foundation. And so this talk will be about how to build an introduction on how to build smart cities or smart societies, obviously from an internet point of view. So again, welcome everyone. And while I will now provide you with an overview of or an introduction, please don't hesitate to raise the hand and interrupt with questions if something I say is not clear. Later we'll have a discussion also and with options to discuss any of the topics we discussed today. Okay? Before we discuss smart cities, it might be interesting to know what smart means. So smart is a very, very devious word, obviously. And so I want to take some time to discuss this topic. You might have heard of any of a number of different technologies that are all supposedly smart. Well, smart meters and smart cars and smart phones and smart TVs and smart homes, smart apartments, anything you can figure or imagine, you can do it in a smart way, supposedly. So the question is if smart here means smart for whom? Is it smart for us? Is it smart for the vendor, the manufacturer? So this is very, very important to determine. Now, smart meters, you know, anyone who hasn't seen a smart meter? Smart meters were perhaps the first connected devices. I worked connecting these devices in the 90s. I know they were connected in the 80s and perhaps even earlier. What they do is they previous or before smart meters you had to read these manually, and so you wanted a way to read them quicker. So they do the calculations and record consumption and report what they find in a connected way, so you don't have to travel to the meter. Now, the problem with this is that it also records what you do at home without you knowing. Perhaps not all details, but it records something. It knows if you're home or not, for instance. And so you have to figure out, is this smart? Well, from the utility point of view, it's very smart. Because they don't have to spend so much time in knowing what you consume. A smartphone, I guess everyone has one, even I have one. Has phoning become smarter or different with a smartphone? So the only function that has not changed is the phoning part. Everything else has become different. It's a great tool for communication or for work or for entertainment, but perhaps not so much. The phoning has become smarter. It's everything else that has become smarter. Again, we have the connected. It's connected. The problem is that it makes us perhaps a bit unaware, more unaware than before about our surroundings. So we can question if it's really that smart for us. But it's a very clever tool. Smart TV, anyone? How many has read the 1984? So you know Big Brother and the smart screen. So while you watched the telescreen, it watched you to see if you conform to the ideals of Big Brother. So the question is obviously you sit there and watch the. We say in Swedish dumburken. In English, I think it's the boob tube. The question is if it watches you back. If you read the news, you know that you have to do certain settings to make sure it doesn't listen to you, because it's a smart feature to listen to you, so it knows when not to interrupt, for instance. Smart home. Smart home. I like Shakespeare's take on the smart home, or Spielberg's take on smart home. If you watched his movies in the 80s, 90s, he had all these. In every movie, there were always smart home gadgets, and so he was really before his time. But smart home, obviously, about automating and facilitating, optimizing everything in your home. Supposedly, it should become simpler, but perhaps not always. To help and automate. Now the question is, why, if you press the light switch in your home, why does the signal have to go outside of your home to a server somewhere before it goes back into your apartment to turn on the light? Which often happens. Why should a signal inside your home at all have to leave? Is that smart? Smart buildings. I mean, you automate a home, you can automate a building, everything related to water heating and maintenance and energy utility, whatever. There are a lot of Gesundheit. So there are a lot of work in maintaining a building, and so obviously you have to optimize this. Now, is it smart for those that live in the building or for those that maintain the building? So obviously, always the one that pays, that gets the benefit of a smart technology. Now, smart car, autonomous car, I guess most know about. Semi-autonomous or automated or fully automated. I like this artist's take on how to trap an autonomous vehicle. So he creates here a medieval magic circle to trap the supposed demon with salt, obviously, just to make it extra correct, and so the vehicle obviously doesn't know how to exit that circle. It can enter, obviously, because of the dashed lines, but it cannot exit. So while we may think it's smart for a vehicle to be able to drive where it's supposed to be able to drive, the limit of smartness is recognized when we reach the boundary of what it's supposed to be able to do. You have these stop signs, for instance, that researchers managed to change with some stickers, and so the car thought this was a speed sign. So instead of stopping, it drove with I think it was 45 miles per hour or something like that. So perhaps not so smart after all. So, and this is the topic. This is why do I discuss this? Because when we decide to work on smart cities, we have to be very clear about what we mean. For whom should the city be smart, or society, if we think even larger? As you have seen, all gadgets, most gadgets, are smart for those that create or manufacture or provide service or things. Not necessarily the end user. And so in the smart city, this is especially important because we as citizens might be actually on the wrong end of the stick unless we know how to build it correctly. And so this is also the purpose of this first introduction. So we become aware of the dangers and the possibilities. So in a smart city, what is usually meant, you also want to automate the different services or different aspects of life in a city. You want to make transport easier, traffic parking easier, healthcare better, law enforcement more efficient, with less resources, obviously. Schools better, all these things, waste management, everything has to be always cheaper and more efficient. And obviously there is the danger also for of missing something. And the question I hope we can answer after this lecture is if this is sufficient or not in our definition of a smart city or smart society. So if we just recapitulate and see what common denominators are there when we talk about smart, at least as it's commonly used. So we have the connectivity, almost always, not necessarily always, but almost always. We have some form of automation and optimization. And so the question then, is smart a buzzword? And I think it's a really great buzzword. I mean, who doesn't want to feel smart? I mean, that's why we buy things. If it says smartphone, we feel better. If it's more expensive, we feel more privileged. And so, and a vendor obviously, no one is able to sell a stupid phone, but a smartphone might just do the trick. And so it's important to be aware of this. So before we go into what a smart city might be in a positive sense, let's focus on a bit what it also can be in a negative sense. Because there is actually very, very scary projects now currently being implemented that I think everyone should be aware of, especially in Europe, where we have new laws that regulate these things. So first, we have to kind of go through hell, so to say, in order to understand what this is about. So perhaps there is no objective way to rank this, but in my views, this might be one of the most ambitious smart city projects in the world today, the Chinese social credit system. If you haven't read about this system, I urge you to do so. It's a very dystopical system that even Orwell wouldn't get close to this system. So what it does is it takes all citizens and then it calculates based on mass surveillance and big data and artificial intelligence 4 different types of scores, your social credit rating, so to say. It calculates how honest you are. It calculates your commercial integrity, if you're good to do business with or not. It calculates your social integrity, how well do you function in society. And it calculates your judicial credibility. So say goodbye to everyone equal under the law. And who is to say that the algorithms they implement are even just? We know they obviously aren't just, but even if you try to be just, how can you prove an algorithm is just? And so this is why this kind of profiling has become illegal in Europe, or for European companies. We'll come into that later. But this is actually being implemented now. So think of this system when you read about the controversy of Google helping the Chinese government with search results. Then you know why many people are upset. So this system collects everything from all you do online, obviously including searches, whatever you buy. If you buy diapers, your social reputation goes up because you're responsible. If you go and buy alcohol, it goes down because you're well, it's better to buy diapers. So and wherever you go, it's important. What friends you have. You have bad friends, you will feel it, literally. Checks your health, obviously, health records. all your bank transactions, all instant messages that they can decrypt, your smart home, which is obviously has now become something against you rather than help you, what news you read, what sources do you use to get news, your dating habits, better be careful. And so obviously there is no privacy in such a system. So what these reputation scores used for? Obviously the government want to affect how their citizens behave. And so these scores are used throughout to chastise bad behavior. So your access to jobs is limited. Your salary is not increased as much if you have a bad score. You cannot travel as you want. Visa restrictions. You don't get access to apartments. What's worse, you cannot place your children in the schools you might want to. So much for not chastising your children for the crimes of their parents. Access to credit, access to internet even. So if you're a really bad person, your internet is cut off. Is this a smart city? Very smart for the government. So, but before we criticize them, let's ask us these questions. How about an environmental impact rating that would estimate who are the environmental bad guys or environmental good guys? Should that be able to affect our ability to do things in society? Or a diversity index, someone might have heard of such a thing. Or our compliance to common values, is that something we should value? So are we much different, perhaps? So it might look like a good idea if you profile others, but immediately when the profiling is done on you, then we feel it might be a bad idea. So I would like to take the opportunity to this is actually the only slide I want you to read. The rest of the slides is more or less for those that aren't here but want to know what we talk about. There is actually something called the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I mean, it's an old, obsolete document, I know. It was written after a devastating world war, and nothing for the modern man, but I think it might be good to read it anyway. And Article 12 is quite short. It's actually one paragraph, and it says like this: no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks. Anyone believe that this law is being, or this article is being fulfilled in any society in the world today? Not so much. It all depends, obviously, how we define arbitrary and attack. So if we just make it disinterestedly enough without too much emotion, perhaps it's not an attack, it's just a smart way to organize society. And perhaps arbitrary here, if we just do everything, then it's not arbitrary. Well, what it means is that obviously there is non-arbitrary interference. We provide courts and police the right to interfere with people's privacy under certain regulations, but that's it. Any other type of interference is arbitrary, and so the government should use its power to protect against such, especially attacks against honor and reputation, because why? You cannot defend yourself against such attacks, and It's very difficult to clear yourself of such attacks. So this is why I bring this up, obviously, is because it's crucial to the definition of a smart city. If we don't include basic fundamental human rights into the definition, we can go horribly wrong. So the question is still open. Will the surveillance state prevail, or will we be able to create a better smart city than what is proposed by the Chinese government? So remember that we might think that we are better than the Chinese, but actually I believe the Chinese are quite impressed with our systems. That's why they hire Google and not their own developers. So the criticism obviously being that we are actually doing this quite well, but we don't do it transparently. The Chinese obviously are transparent with what they do. So that's why it sounds terrible. So just to recapitulate, to distinguish how we could go about this, either you have an approach, the authoritarian regime approach, which is top down. It's very efficient. It's very easy to make decisions, obviously, but at least comparison to bottom-up approach. So you just create your laws, and it becomes ubiquitous everywhere. There's no discussion. And in order to achieve this, you sacrifice the individual freedoms of the citizens. So that's the small price you pay, which is obviously a very cheap price for government, the state, but not for its citizens. So let's consider our method, which to some might not be much better. There, the government leaves these issues to the market forces. They don't want to decide anything because they don't know actually what's right and wrong. Would they have been interested in technology and internet, they wouldn't have been perhaps working in government. They would have worked with internet, just to say. But what happens is that when you have these market forces, you have a multitude of companies. Some are successful, some are not. The successful obviously get better and better in what they do. The problem obviously being that there is no interest between different domains to exchange ideas. So the different ideas all become segmented verticals, all operating under their own rules. Since the competition makes companies hurry with decisions, so solutions are not necessarily well thought through, and definitely not transparent, because it's called a company secret, trade secret. And very, very successful businesses they have a tendency to strive for monopoly. You get this robber baron. These robber barons that exploit new uncharted territories, and they become so successful they get a virtual monopoly on in this area, and become very, very rich and can control the future development. No one is able to compete with this. Now, this is just the start, obviously. So what happens then is, as time passes, people reach a consensus finally, sometimes, and so you can create standards, and you work towards common goals and learn to interoperate. It's not the first step, but it comes eventually, hopefully. And if it doesn't, a government can come in and regulate markets. There are antitrust laws, and they can create new laws in these new areas where there are no sufficient protection. And so finally, in the end, hopefully, it works out. It's always a question, because just because we have worked it out before doesn't mean we will work it out every time in the future. So that's just the danger we're in. So we need to take this into account when we plan to work on smart cities, smart societies. We have to take all this into account. And we have to understand the reason why robber barons appear and why they get so much power. And we all know, we don't have to mention any names, even though we might have already, but there are some robber barons today that have virtual monopoly almost on information and personal information, what we do. And this field is completely unregulated, I would say. There are some laws that move into this area, like the new General Data Protection Regulation, that help protect some of your privacy, but no one is able to define who owns data. You can define ownership of a lot of things, but not information yet. And this is why it's possible to create these robber barons that can do anything to your data, because you cannot claim that the data is yours. Another aspect that we discussed, the problem of market forces, is that they all focus on just their own objective, and so there is no real incentive for a company to share the information or access to smart things with others. And so here, different standards bodies you might recognize. Internet Engineering Task Force, which standardized the internet, for instance. You might recognize the IEEE, which standardized everything related to electronics engineering, ISO, etc. So, why it's important? So, if we want to build a smart society, we have to figure out what it means. If someone installs devices everywhere, we want to be able to access them. We don't want, for instance, everyone that wants to do the same thing to install a new device. For instance, take a water meter. If you have one water meter just for billing, do you have to install 2 or 3 or 4 water meters because you want to have smart services connected to that reads the water? So, for instance, the water meter might be used for billing, but it can also be used for assisted living. So, an elderly person lives in an apartment. If that person doesn't consume any water in 24 hours, what does it mean? Or what might it mean? That the person has had an accident. So the same water meter can also be used to help that person, perhaps before something fatal happens. The same with building maintenance or insurance. If the water meter every hour during 24 hours reports water consumption, there's probably a leak, which might be very costly if the leak is in a hidden place. So we have all these 3 different companies who want to do the same thing, get the water meter, or access to the water consumption, but they can't, because of lack of interoperability and etc. So we will talk more about this. A smart camera might be outside, it might be in your home. You might install your smart camera because you're afraid of burglars. So you have your security system. However, only you can get access to it, and some hackers. But those that you would want to give access to it might not have it. For instance, if you're away, you might want your neighbors, trusted neighbors, to have access to your camera to be able to see what's happening inside. You might want your family members to have access to your camera, especially if you have a camera with your elderly parents or grandparents. In healthcare, you might, if someone is sick, you might treat someone from home, but then you need perhaps a camera to be able to monitor what's happening. You need access to the same camera. If in ambulance is called dispatch to a scene, they might gain very useful information to prepare just by having access to a camera. Police, they might avoid spilling time on false alarms if they have access to camera, and prepare better if they can see something real has happened. So there are all these legitimate cases that cannot be properly addressed unless there is true interoperability between devices. So to create smart city, obviously this is very important. But what's not smart is to allow also the burglars and voyeurs access to this camera. So the question is, how do you do that? How can you permit some but not everyone else? How can you choose? So we need an objective way to measure what smart means, and we need objective standards to learn how things work. They have to be well thought through, not driven by a certain company's interest. They have to be interoperable across different domains, so that different companies that are not perhaps natural cooperators, that they can use the same equipment, and they have to protect fundamental human rights. Now, what are standards used for? One of the most known standards, the first one, was the width of rails in railways. And why was it necessary? So that trains from one domain, one country, could go into the domain of another country. And so it's the same in a smart city. We need these standards so that data from one thing in one company can be used for a completely different thing in another company. But why would a company allow someone else to access? I mean, they can spend millions or hundreds of millions in equipment, development, and all that. Why would they allow other companies access to their precious hardware? I mean, the only thing they know from start is that that would increase the load on their own system, so it would decrease their own performance, and it would allow for competitors to create a competing service without having to invest in hardware. So actually what we see today is that companies, they don't want interoperability, they want to protect themselves, and so this inhibits the development of a smart city. We need to help companies find an incentive to interoperate. And the basis here is we need to create open markets. We need it to become possible for anyone that invests in a device to get money back if someone else uses it. Otherwise, there is no incentive for interoperability, and so the smart city will not become or come into being. Very important. Remember, open is not the same as free. This is often confused. We need open internet, and an open internet. It doesn't mean everything has to be free. We have an open society with open authorities, open data, everything, but the investment costs money, the effort and development of services and access costs money, so it's just fair that everyone that is interested in access also pays for their share, their usage. So we're getting close now to at least be able to formulate a vision of the components necessary for a smart city. So I've listed here these points, which might seem far-fetched, but they're not as far-fetched as they might sound. First, ubiquitous access to interoperable sensors and things. So everywhere in society, in a smart society, there will be sensors and devices everywhere, and we have to be able to have access to those to avoid having to install multiple versions of the same thing. At the same time, we have to have ubiquitous access to data from our governments. Any authority, more or less, without except a few protected. Also, every niche in society is going to have a smart service filling the needs of that niche. We need a definition of ownership of information. Not only do we need technology that protect the ownership of information, we also need to protect it by law. We need obviously protection of privacy. we have somewhat already with a new legislation. It has to be by design and by default. We can talk more about that. And we need open markets for access to these things. Without the markets, there will be no development of a smart city. So you might wonder if this is new to you, how much of this exists already? So the first three things here was actually formulated already in 1988 by Mark Weiser. And for some reason, most of these internet pioneers, they worked at Xerox PARC. They probably had some buried aliens there or something. They invented everything, at least conceptually. Except for the interoperability part, they defined this, it's called ubiquitous computing. So they envisioned that everything will, even though they had these big computers, everything would just disseminate in the future outwards towards the edge. Everything would become computerized. And you would also have this ubiquitous access. So I invite you to read more about these ideas. Unfortunately, this gentleman died already in '99, so it stopped there. But work has continued, and one effort is within IEEE. It's called IoT harmonization, which aims to do the rest. It adds the interoperability part to ubiquitous computing, but it also aims to define ownership of information, protection of privacy by design in the infrastructure, and also a market for access to data and things. And this work is now funded by the Swedish Internet Fund, and that's also why we're here having this talk. So they fund parts of this work, which is related to these open markets. I see you're all fascinated, or does this make sense at all? Or yeah. So let's talk a bit about ownership. So how do we define ownership? How can I say this is my laptop or my phone or my non-working LED laser pointer? And who, in the case of a sensor, is supposed to be the owner? If I do an invention, if I create something, the invention, I can say it's mine. If I have a gold bar and I put it in a safe, I can say it's mine. But if I have a sensor that records temperature in my home, who owns that temperature value? You know? It is not very clear. I will tell you why. So there are these three options, and in different cases it's one or the other. So you might have the entity or person that generates the information. This is what you say, for instance, or the processor. The owner, yes, this is what I mentioned, the processor. So, but the three options are: if I create a device, I invent a device that measures something new. No one has ever measured this. I create this device and I give it to you and say, this is your device. Now, the data that this device generates, is it mine or is it yours? Just because you own the device. Or if I take the data from the device and store it in my backend, is it mine or the backend? But if the backend resides on Amazon or Azure, is it Microsoft's or Amazon's? So this is a problem already because there is no law that governs this. And especially if we look at the broader scale, we want to create globally interoperable smart societies. But we have also the new privacy regulation that says it doesn't define ownership, but at least it's close to, and says that if the data relates to, if it measures temperature from, for instance, it measures your body temperature. It's clearly related to you as a person. Even though I control it or process it, I cannot keep it unless you want to. So I cannot claim it's mine. Perhaps you cannot claim it's yours, but almost. So we're still in gray area here. So we have 4 different types of legislation that try to come close to defining ownership of information. We have copyright legislation, we have trade secrets legislation, we have intellectual property legislation, and privacy legislation. No one yet defines ownership. So enforcing ownership is very difficult. However, how do we define ownership of common physical objects? I mean, if we buy a house, obviously there's a register, or a car, or even we might have a gold bar, it might have a serial number. So very expensive things we can record. We can have a notarius publicus record that we own something, and it becomes a public record. But how do we define ownership of common things? We don't go and record everything we have. So if I have something valuable and I leave it outside on the sidewalk, and someone takes it, can I claim they robbed me because they took my thing? Obviously, it wouldn't hold in court. So there are certain things we need to do in order to claim that the thing is ours. We have to protect it somehow, perhaps behind lock and key. We have to give access to the thing only to trusted parties. If anyone can have access to it, then it's difficult to claim it's ours. We also have to monitor it. If we have something in our attic for 50 years, and then we say, go up and look, and it's not there, can we claim it was actually ours if we go to the insurance company? Perhaps not. We also need to demonstrate that we own it. Otherwise, ownership is in doubt. And we can do the same thing with data under certain conditions. So if you have the data in your possession locally, you are actually able to do the same thing. You can protect the data behind lock and key. You can limit access to it only to trusted parties. You know to whom you give access. You can monitor that you still have it. You can demonstrate that you own it. And you can also enforce this ownership. And you do this through restricting access. But this is only possible as long as you have the access to the data, or you control the data. As soon as you give it away to someone else to do this, you lose these possibilities. It's very difficult for you to claim that the information is yours. Now, local storage or local processing of your information has an added bonus. Anyone who has studied economy knows that value is based on limited access. As soon as something has a limited access, it becomes valuable. Anything to which everyone can have access has no value. So by having your data locally and controlling access, you automatically create a value. And this, some of you might understand, is also the basis for the open market that we'll discuss later. So one key of many in building a smart society that respects fundamental human rights is to base it on edge computing rather than cloud computing. You can see this as the two different endpoints of a spectrum. And if you do so, if you have the valuable information on the edge instead of in the cloud, you get a possibility to define access as value. You have a natural way to scale. Scalability is normally a problem in centric solutions. You have a resilient solution. You don't have any one or two or singular points of failure. And there are very nice security features also, which we'll discuss. Okay, it was me, sorry. So the aliens are here. Yeah, probably. If I stand like this. Can you still hear me? No. Yes? Can you hear me? Okay, I trust you. And those that listen to this online, they can also hear it? Yes? Yeah. Okay. Clear as this far? Okay. We're getting to the end now in this presentation, so you'll soon get more coffee. So, data protection. We've discussed security, we've discussed privacy. Data protection is obviously a key concern in any smart society. At least we would hope it is, unless we work for the Chinese government. I always like to bring this quote up. Those of you that don't know this gentleman, James Clapper, he was the Director of National Intelligence in the United States under Obama. And he made a report, they made a report where he said that America's greatest threat is the Internet of Things. And it's not as if America has a few threats. And so the Internet of Things, according to him and his agency, is the Internet of Things. And I agree, actually. And it's not only America's greatest threat. And I'll try to explain why. I mean, from all the threats that they face, atomic warfare from a few countries, and biological and whatever hazards you have, and terrorism, Internet of Things is worse. And the reason, one of the reasons is the following: you only pay for a function, you never pay for security. It's invisible. So you pay for an angel, as in this case, but you get the bat also. So you have to see the negative space also, but no one ever pays for that. So vulnerabilities always appear in what's not defined, and what's not defined or not specified is undefined often. And so unknown things happen. And obviously these are exploited by those that know better. So I don't want to dramatize here. So I tried to find a terrifying image for Internet of Things, but I had to do the second worst, atomic warfare. So I ask your forgiveness. So why is IoT worse than just normal IT? So IT is worse for several reasons. One, obviously, all Internet of Things solutions are installed for the long term. In normal operation, you perhaps plan a couple of years, but Internet of Things systems have to work decades. And so during this time, the technologies used to protect it almost guaranteed become obsolete. And there are very, very few ways to update devices sometimes. So as long as time goes, these systems become vulnerable. There are some new laws, especially in the United States, that require devices to be updatable, but very few devices actually are. Now, another aspect with Internet of Things is that they all interact with the physical world. I mean, they actually do something perhaps useful. And so obviously it's very interesting to be able to hack them, especially if you're an enemy of a society. You want to be able to disrupt the society in case of a conflict. They're also much larger scale. So for each individual, there might be hundreds or thousands of devices, or even more in a decade or two. Also, the typical operation is invisible. So the point of ubiquitous computing is that you don't notice it. It's all outside of your principal sphere of interest. And so since it's invisible, you don't have any visible clues that something is not right. You don't get these warning systems or warnings that something is wrong. They typically don't have human operators. As a computer does, you can see if a screen pops up when it shouldn't, but on a device you don't. And lack of supervision. So they're very, very vulnerable over time. It's very difficult to create an Internet of Things system that is secure for a decade or two. Did you? Oops. So there is for your information, I will give you these slides, and you will have them available. So all this information will be available to you. Now, we discussed edge computing in comparison to cloud computing, and this has a very interesting security aspects also, because obviously if you have a distributed set of computers, you have more computers to attack. And so you have more attack surfaces. However, each node that you can attack is worth less. You have, so to say, less eggs in each basket. So the value effort ratio is small. So it's easier to protect the value inside the node than you would in a centralized system. So massive data breaches are also therefore more difficult. If you manage to breach a node, you get very limited amount of information, and also more resilient. If you attack or disrupt certain nodes, it doesn't affect the entire system. And you can also keep information protected. Even if the operator wanted, it would not be able to gain access to the information. So decentralization or edge computing is an efficient tool also for security. Now, you might be aware that there is a discussion about how do we protect our privacy on the internet. You might know that some propose ideas of anonymized access to the internet, anonymizing everything, even though that's very difficult. Others that say that no, the answer to privacy and protection are strong identities, that you cannot do anything on the internet without a strong identity, so everyone knows who is sending what message. And I want to say that both of these approaches to privacy are true in the sense that they both protect privacy, but for different reasons. So anonymization obviously protects a whistleblower, someone who doesn't want to be, or say something that doesn't want to be found out. It protects a dissident in an authoritarian regime. It also protects a criminal or a terrorist. They want to plot against the society. It makes security decisions very difficult. It's easy to publish information without getting caught, but it's very difficult for you to decide to whom should I give this data. If you're owner of information, remember we discussed ownership of information, you don't want to publish it because then you lose the value. You want to make sure that you give it only to those that you trust. And you cannot do that with an anonymized setting. You can only do this if everyone has a strong identity. So even though it might feel counterintuitive to have strong identity for privacy, it actually is for the information owner. it allows you to select to whom to give the information. So for a company, for instance, protecting its intellectual property, they never want intellectual property to be published. They only want to give it, for instance, to partners who have signed a non-disclosure agreement, for instance. And so in order to achieve this, all participants need strong identities. I will not speak much about this because we have an entire lecture about what standards organizations are doing now to help with infrastructure and public interfaces in order to solve all these things. But as you have imagined, having things for decades out in the internet becomes very problematic if you want to have open access. How is this thing supposed to know with whom it is allowed to communicate a decade in the future? I mean, there's no way of knowing when you create a device or configure the device with whom it will communicate. And so what this effort is about is provide infrastructure for things to communicate securely and privately, define ownership, allow things to be discovered appropriately, allow owners to control who gets access to them, provide decision support for things so they can know what to do in new circumstances. It also provides smart contracts and economic feedback to the device owner in case someone actually uses the device. Still awake. Last section. Then we'll have a discussion about these topics. So I've just given you now a brief overview, an introduction to what is required from an ICT perspective to create a smart city. While many of these ideas might be new, they're actually already available, most of them, and ready to be used. So during 7 lectures and 7 laboratory or labs here at Goto 10, we will experiment with this. We will go deeper into the different aspects that I talked about. I'll provide you with these links if you have all you registered, or are someone here that hasn't registered, because I got your mail addresses. If you haven't registered, then you can give me your mail address and I'll add it and mail this to you. So you can come and listen to anyone. It's not necessary to attend all if you're not as perversely interested in this as I am, but you're allowed to, of course. And also these labs, I will be there in the annex. Anyone is, of course, invited to come. I will be here most of these days, but the times are available on the Goto 10 site, and we'll play around with these technologies so you can see in action how they work out and why they're important. Also, I've written about many of these things in my book, Mastering Internet of Things. If you work with development or architecture, you can check that book out also. They're available in Amazon Unpacked and Microsoft Store. You can also contact me there. You can scan the QR code later if you want. So I wanted to end today's lecture with this. Of course, take as much coffee you want, and then I want to open up a discussion about this. If you have questions or worries about these things, or opine if you have other ideas about how this should be done or could be done, then it would be very interesting to bring this up. So the if you don't have a question, I've prepared a few questions here. You don't have to answer or ask these questions. So, yes. 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 So obviously these are buzzwords. In Swedish we talk about smarta samhällen. And so smart cities in Swedish smart society. Society is just a generalization, supposedly. Technology in a smart city would be available in a smart society. And there is, as I've used them interchangeably, as you said, I don't make myself a big distinction between them. Even though you could argue, for instance, that election of government, direct democracy, and so on could be a part of a smart society. Good question.
What about in rural areas where you don't have access to all the monitoring technology?
So the question is, I don't dare to take that one, start a loop here. So the question is then, what about rural area? And so obviously there are other fields. We talk about smart agriculture and smart all these things. In order to have automation and optimization, you have at least local connectivity. And you have similar problems, obviously. In the world, as you know, there are many places that are resource constrained. You have limits on water, you have limits on all different kinds of resources, and there is actually a lot of work going into the efficient distribution of water, for instance, in an automated manner. And the problem is the same as the optimization of anything in a smart society. So in that regards, the rural area and the city area, they are not a lot different. Perhaps the bandwidth is different, but that's it. Was that the response to your question? Yeah?
I was just thinking that there are rural areas that can't be monitored in the same way. You know, that you don't have cameras in the remote mountains in areas and things like that, so it's harder to monitor the citizens.
You would be surprised. I mean, in a city you have the blocks. It's very difficult to monitor a city, but in a rural area you have a lot more overview and other technologies. So. Anyone else? Yes? Sorry, perhaps that.
So in a fully smart city, how would the cost of living change? I would imagine that would have an impact on that.
So again, the cost of living, it depends on for whom the smartness is about, obviously. And cost depends on access. And as we get more and more and resources dwindle, costs might actually increase, even though we do everything for them to decrease. It's difficult to say.
The way you talk, it's a bit frightening with what can be done with like the grey areas and what's never said and so on. The question is, today, are we too early to install things, buy things, and put them in our houses? Should we wait until things are better regulated, or will it be better regulated? What do you think?
So it's a good question. Or is it a wise idea to use this new technology that is available? I would say that as long as you know how things work, use it accordingly. If you don't invest in new technology, the technology doesn't even have a chance to evolve either. So as long as you don't live in ignorance, you can adapt, and this is the key point. Make sure you select well. Make sure that you don't think that you are protected when you're not. but don't become an hermit either. So for technology to evolve, it needs interest and it needs implementation. It needs people to like these ideas and use them. So that's very important. Others that are depressed now need to hear better news. Where's the coffee?
So how do you see the transformation from today into the edge computing, where we are in charge of our information? How do you see the next 5 to 10 years?
So already today it's quite clear in the news what happens to big centralized systems. And of course every time such a thing happens, it creates incentives for others to create a similar thing to fill the void in a decentralized manner with edge. So just knowing about this will perhaps make you select an edge choice instead of a cloud choice if there is an option between the two. And so just with knowledge about these things, this will gradually change the situation. And that's why I'm, in a sense, optimistic. I believe that since we are able to discuss these things and we are still able to create secure solutions, in the end we will have them. The Chinese are not as lucky. They cannot create secure ways. The government will punish those that try. And so they will have trouble having a safe society in the future. So I might ask you then, how many of you here are familiar with internet technologies? How many are interested in architecture perhaps, or arts? Where are you from?
20 seconds around everybody. I mean, for working or?
Yes.
Yes, I work in a municipality with
okay.
economy.
So this is close to you because you want to see a better society in the future?
Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. Yeah, I work within the IT area, so I'm part of the technologies, and these kind of discussions are very interesting when it comes to finding solutions for the future and where to start building the society from a privacy or information perspective. Very good.
And I'm Joachim Lindborg. I work in a company called Sustainable Innovation, and we work with the energy renewable area, the total change of the whole energy system, which also relates to this very much.
A lot of smart city and smart grid.
Very much.
Another smart term, smart grid.
I work at VSP. It's in VSP Telecom. So it's about consulting in all areas for the building, for the society.
So secure communication is close to your heart. Yeah.
I'm within banking.
Okay.
And actually, to be particular within know your customer area.
Okay.
That's why this topic also kind of interesting for me.
Okay. We will not hang you, but I understand. Sorry. So banking obviously is a crucial element in a functioning society. A lot of people are critical to banks, but no society would work without banks. And so obviously having banks involved in the smart society is necessary. And I am very happy to see you here.
I'm a consultant. I work with IoT, particularly in the semiconductor industry and with the smart home and wearables.
Yes. Wearables also obviously very personal, so security is close.
Hello, I am Alessandro. I have background in IT and architectural lighting design, so kind of both fields. And I think I'm mostly interested in technology that can implement and take care of the feeling of humanities, I think. I think that's where we should go. Nowadays technology are mostly for tech, and I think with this framework we are going there somehow.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So architecture, how do we create smart societies? Very close.
Hi, my name is Artem. I'm a system developer, a consultant. Mostly working with web, but I'm also lately became really curious about IoT technologies and the more from implementation perspective. So here I'm discovering the other half of it, the organizational and maybe a bit of ideological part of how do we see the IoT future.
So as a developer, how does the specification look like you get from a customer? How many points are related to data protection and how many points are functional? Okay. So that he's not alone. He's not alone.
Business secrets.
Business trade secret, yes.
So my name is Matthias. I'm especially interested in IT since we are running an IT consulting company that are driving a lot of IoT incentives at our clients. But personally, I'm also involved in other areas, especially down in Eastern Africa, where we try to implement IoT in different smart containers or breweries, etc.
So now you know how.
I'm also here to support you, Peter.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Okay, my name is Henrik, and I run a consulting firm, and I'm particularly interested in this more on a societal term and also the integrity part. Thinking a lot about internet and how that is affecting our lives, and of course, as a concerned father of 2 young daughters, also for their future. So.
Yeah, this is very important. Everyone who's a parent obviously is more concerned about the children than themselves. So while we might take risk, we don't want our children to take risks unnecessarily.
Yeah, okay, I'm Daniel, and I'm an IT guy, and I like to get dirty with things. But I'm here mostly to get like a big picture. It's very easy to see the technical details, but not how things are affected in a big way for society and so on. And it's nice to see the big picture.
I hope you come to the labs then, so we get our hands dirty.
Yeah, I will.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Linda. I'm working in an IT consulting company, and I'm also here to see the big picture and the important part of our society in the future. Very interesting. Thank you, Peter.
Two supporters.
Hello, my name is Gabriel, and I work as an ICT strategist for educational sector for a smaller municipality in Stockholm. And I'm interested in the value we could create in relation to the costs we're spending and how that could. I mean, we're facing challenges in the educational sector regarding the budget and how to provide quality in relation to what we spend, and this is an interesting field for me.
So this is very important for you to help develop the next generation education system.
Hi, my name is Denise. I seem to be the only one not working here. I'm a student at KTH doing my last year. I have a background in computer science and I'm doing IT and media management. And I am here to see where I want to position myself later on.
Okay. Let us know if you need an interesting project.
Hi, I'm Rasmus. I have a futures research company, and we do. So we sort of model society and look at what disruptive technologies like this will actually do to it, and if it will actually disrupt something or not.
Interesting. So this is very important.
Yeah, we've been studying this for ages, long before when.
Yeah, as you saw already in '88, the aliens at Xerox discussed these things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's the questions aren't new,
No.
The new thing is that it's actually doable.
So now it's getting close.
And one of the things we see is that people really don't understand what's possible to do with this technology.
Yes.
So I'm one of the co-writers of a manifesto, not for the smart city, but for the automagic city, because we feel that there's a need for a new way of describing what and giving ideas about what the technology actually can do.
Yes. So this is very interesting. I hope we can work more in this area. So it's very important.
So cool.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Marlene, and I'm also a student at KTH in electrical engineering, last year of a bachelor engineering program. So I'm just curious about both the possibilities and concerns with the Internet of Things. I came here directly from an Internet of Things summit day at Waterfront, so it's really a lot of interesting issues.
Okay, so you're turbocharged. Let us know if you need a project also.
Yeah, I'm starting to looking for a thesis project. So
yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Camilla. I work at WISEBY with digital communication and e-learning.
Okay, interesting.
Hi, I'm Janita, and I'm working with learning in organizations, and I'm currently at ICA.
Okay. There's a lot here to teach. There are a lot of people who need to know this.
Vilho Jonsson, Innovation Management Consultancy Firm. My name is Vilho Jonsson. That's not the name of the firm. I have a background in telecoms, both from the vendor and the operator part.
Okay.
So this is, and this is also dear to my heart as a citizen of a Western democratic kind of society. I like the aspect of controlling the information and letting other access it and not necessarily get the information that I have, but they get the result to the question that they want to know.
Excellent.
So I very much support this.
And also operators are key in forming the infrastructure of a smart society.
Exactly.
So very, very interesting.
I'm Jannike, and I work for a housing company owned by the municipality. And we don't really have any incentives or projects going on, but we are curious.
Okay, so you might have one soon then.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah, my name is Anna, and I work for the same company as Jannike. And yeah, we came here because we are starting to realize that these questions are something that we need to consider.
Definitely.
And also the question about we have a lot of tenants and a lot of information about our tenants. What do we do with that? And how do we help our tenants?
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
How do we help our tenants to
better.
be a part of a smart city?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I almost died there. Okay. So this is the problem often. We have a lot of this very interesting data, and we don't realize that it's not ours. We think, yes, but often, I mean, I've been in this situation also. Oh, all this data, I can do all these interesting things, but I have to slap my wrist and say, no, that's perhaps not a good idea. But in the next project, you will have.
Is it my turn? Okay. I'm Patrick. I work with software development, and but I'm also a freelance writer, and I'm simply a tech geek, man. I like technology and the internet specifically, and new stuff. I write for a computer magazine.
And so this, okay, great. So this resonated with you?
For sure.
Okay, great.
My name is Jonas, and I am consultant. Right now I do data analytics. And when you talk about this, I think about this to track data and measure the sensors, and maybe connecting to blockchain so we can have some good information.
So he mentioned here blockchain, and I start to shiver, but I'll explain why more in another section, in another of these lectures. So otherwise we won't be able to finish here today. Yeah? Anyone else? Okay, it has been very interesting to know you. If you have further questions, please don't hesitate. Perhaps we can close this streaming, and thank you everyone that watched this lecture online, and we can continue the discussion here.
Thank you.